We saw a figure standing in the distance, but it flickered like a dying candle. At first I thought it was only a trick of the rain moving through the trees. The storm had broken an hour earlier, leaving the forest wet and steaming under a dim gray sky, and every branch carried beads of water that caught the last of the light. But the thing ahead of us did not move like rain or shadow. It stood between the trunks at the far edge of sight, thin as a charred post, wavering in and out of existence. Eli stopped walking beside me. "You see it too?" I nodded without answering. The figure blinked once. Not vanished. Blinked. One instant it stood against a cedar trunk, and the next the space was empty, as though the world itself had skipped over it. Then it returned 3 feet to the left. Neither of us spoke after that. The trail we had followed since morning barely deserved the name anymore. It had narrowed into a dark seam between enormous roots, swallowed on both sides by undergrowth so dense it looked woven together. Moss hung from the trees in thick wet ropes. The trunks rose straight upward without branches for 30 or 40 feet before vanishing into a canopy that sealed away most of the daylight. Even before we saw the figure, the silence inside those woods had started pressing against me. Not normal silence. Forests always carry noise beneath the quiet. Insects, birds shifting through leaves, water moving underground. But this place held nothing. Our boots and breathing sounded too loud, as if the woods had absorbed every other living thing. Eli had noticed it earlier. "No birds," he muttered while crossing a stream an hour before dusk. "Not even flies." I tried to laugh it off then. Ancient forests always felt strange to me. Too old, too dense. But the deeper we went, the more distorted everything became. Distances stretched in ways that hurt my eyes. Trees that seemed 20 yards away took minutes to reach. A slope we climbed for half an hour appeared flat whenever I turned around. Even the air felt wrong. Cold drifted through the woods in slow currents, touching the back of my neck in damp breaths. The figure flickered again ahead of us. This time it vanished in sections. Its upper body disappeared first, leaving the legs standing alone among the trees. Then the legs went dark too, and for half a second the forest ahead was empty. A pulse of nausea moved through me when it returned. It had not come closer. The distance remained exactly the same no matter how long we walked. The figure stayed suspended at the edge of visibility like something painted onto the woods. Eli whispered, "Maybe someone's out here." "Doing what?" He did not answer. We kept moving anyway. The silence deepened with the dark. I stopped walking. "Eli," he turned. "It's changing." "I know." His voice sounded strained and distant. For the first time since entering the forest, I saw real fear in him. Eli usually dismissed everything with practical explanations. Broken trail markers, faulty compasses, animal noises in the dark. But now he kept staring at the figure with the same rigid expression I felt spreading across my own face. Then we heard footsteps behind us. Not near, farther back along the trail. Soft, slow, deliberate. Both of us froze instantly. The footsteps stopped too. I listened until my ears hurt. Nothing followed. Only the thick silence pressing between the trees. Eli spoke without turning around. "Don't look back yet." "Why?" "Because if someone's there, they know we heard them." The cold in the air intensified. I could see my breath faintly drifting in front of me. Another step sounded behind us. Closer. I turned before Eli could stop me. The trail behind us lay empty beneath the dim forest light. Wet roots twisted across the ground. Black trunks crowded together into endless depth. Nothing moved, but the silence had changed. It no longer felt empty. It felt occupied. Eli grabbed my arm. "We keep walking." Toward the figure. I almost argued, but the thought of remaining still felt worse. We moved faster, boots slipping in mud and needles. The forest floor sloped downward without warning. Ferns brushed against my legs with clammy resistance, and several times I caught the sensation of something touching my backpack lightly from behind. The figure remained ahead. Flicker. Gone. Return. Flicker. Each disappearance lasted slightly longer than the last. Then it vanished completely. Relief rushed through me so fast it almost hurt. A second later, Eli stopped dead. I followed his stare. The figure stood between two trees barely 30 feet away. I could not understand how it had crossed the distance so quickly. One moment it had been far ahead, impossibly distant. Now it waited close enough for details to emerge through the gloom. Its outline shivered constantly, edges blurring in and out like film burning inside a projector. Parts of it appeared transparent while others remained solid. I could see tree bark through its torso, but its face stayed dark. Not shadowed, empty. The shape where a face should have been flickered with faint gray light, pulsing weakly like embers beneath ash. Eli whispered, "Jesus!" The figure jerked sideways. Not a step, a violent displacement. It snapped 3 feet to the right without crossing the space between, limbs stuttering through impossible angles. I heard myself inhale sharply. Then the forest answered. All around us came the sound of breathing. Low, wet, uneven. Not one set of lungs. Many. The darkness between the trees thickened as shapes emerged from it. Tall forms stood motionless behind trunks, half concealed by moss and shadow. Some appeared human at first glance, but their proportions shifted whenever I focused on them. Arms too long, shoulders bending backward, heads tilted at impossible degrees. Every one of them flickered faintly. Eli backed away slowly until his shoulder touched mine. "We leave," he murmured. No argument from me. We turned together and started uphill through the trees, abandoning the trail entirely. Branches clawed at our jackets. Mud sucked at our boots. Behind us the breathing continued, patient and synchronized. Then came another sound underneath it. Whispering. Not language exactly. More like fragments of speech dissolving before reaching comprehension. The murmurs drifted between the trees from every direction at once. The figure appeared again ahead of us. Close. Too close. It stood beside a massive cedar, body flickering violently now. Each pulse revealed different versions of it. The thin old woman, a child missing half its jaw, a man with water pouring endlessly from his mouth. The images overlapped too quickly to separate. I squeezed my eyes shut. When I opened them, the figure remained. Eli made a strained noise beside me. Blood ran from his nose. He wiped it away shakily. "We need light." His flashlight beam cut through the dark in a trembling arc. The figure vanished instantly. For one hopeful second, I thought the light had driven it away. Then the beam touched the surrounding trees. The trunks were covered in faces. Not carved faces. Real ones emerging from the bark itself, pale and stretched thin beneath layers of wood grain. Mouths hung open silently. Eyelids fluttered weakly under translucent bark. Eli cursed and swung the flashlight aside. The faces disappeared. But something moved above us. A rapid skittering raced through the canopy from tree to tree, far too heavy to belong to any animal. Bark showered down nearby. I aimed my own light upward and caught only fragments. Elongated limbs folding around branches, patches of gray skin, clusters of dim, ember-like lights staring downward through the leaves. Then the lights blinked out. The forest fell silent again. Eli's flashlight flickered once, twice. The beam dimmed to a weak yellow thread. "No," he whispered. The batteries had been fresh that morning. Mine died moments later. Darkness closed around us completely. Not ordinary darkness. This felt thick, material pressing against my eyes. I could smell the forest breathing now, damp earth mixing with the copper scent of old blood. Something touched the back of my neck. I spun wildly and saw nothing. But Eli was gone. I called his name once. The woods swallowed it whole. Then, somewhere very near, his voice answered. "Don't move." Relief flooded through me until I realized the voice came from the wrong direction. Eli had been standing to my left. The voice spoke from directly ahead. A faint glow appeared between the trees. The figure, closer than ever. Its body flickered rapidly in broken bursts, revealing glimpses of impossible movement between each pulse. Limbs unfolding backward, head splitting apart vertically before sealing shut again. shapes crowding inside its torso like trapped bodies pressing against thin fabric. And behind the flickering light stood Eli. At least I thought it was him. He faced away from me, motionless among the trees. "Eli," I whispered. He did not respond. I backed away through the darkness, pulse hammering so hard it blurred my vision. Branches scraped my face. Wet roots twisted beneath my boots. But no matter how far I retreated, the figure remained the same distance away, flickering softly between the trees like the last flame inside a dying lantern. And somewhere beyond it, deeper in the ancient dark, dozens of other lights began to appear. The deeper we walked, the trees grew thinner, until they were almost skeletal. Mara said it quietly, more to herself than to me, but the words settled into the silence like something spoken inside a church. I looked ahead along the narrowing trail and understood immediately. The trunks had changed. When we entered the forest that morning, the trees had been enormous. Ancient firs with bark like wet stone and roots thick enough to split the earth. Their branches tangled overhead in dense layers that blocked most of the daylight. Oppressive, yes, but alive in a familiar way. Now the trunks stood farther apart. They were pale, not white, but drained, as though color had been leached from them. Bark clung in thin strips to exposed wood, giving them the appearance of bones stripped clean. The branches overhead had narrowed two long, crooked limbs reaching into the gray sky like frozen fingers. I stopped walking and listened. Nothing. No birds. No insects. Even the wind seemed absent. The forest held itself in perfect stillness, and the silence carried a pressure I could feel in my ears. Mara adjusted her pack. We should have hit the river by now. I checked the map again, though I already knew it was useless. The trail marked on paper had vanished hours earlier. What remained was only a faint depression winding deeper between skeletal trunks. "We keep east," I said. "That's what you said 2 hours ago." She wasn't angry, just tired. Cold seeped upward through my boots. Even my breathing felt strange here. The air tasted stale, untouched. We continued. The farther we walked, the more the forest transformed. Moss disappeared first, then undergrowth. Soon the earth itself darkened into gray-black soil packed hard as concrete. The trees rose from it in twisted clusters, thin and bare, their roots exposed like tendons. Every so often I noticed movement in the distance. Not animals, the trees themselves shifting. I would glance away and look back to find a trunk standing several feet closer. Sometimes branches leaned at different angles. Once I could have sworn an entire grove had rotated toward us. I stopped mentioning it after the third time. Around late afternoon we found the first carcass. At least I thought it was a carcass. Something hung suspended between two trees 30 yards off the trail. From a distance it resembled a deer caught in vines. But up close I saw there were no vines. Thin wooden growths protruded directly through the body, piercing its torso and limbs like sharpened roots. The skin looked fused to the bark. Its head drooped sideways at an impossible angle. Empty eye sockets stared into the trees. Mara covered her mouth. Jesus Christ. The smell reached us, cold earth and wet wood. No rot. No decay. The body appeared dried from the inside out. Then it moved. A small twitch passed through one arm. Mara gasped. The movement repeated, weak, trembling, not alive, reflexive, like a branch shifting in distant wind. "We leave," she whispered. We walked faster, speaking only when necessary. Shadows stretched unnaturally long between the pale trunks. More than once I caught glimpses of figures standing motionless deeper in the woods. Tall shapes blending with the skeletal trees until they vanished when I focused on them. Then Mara grabbed my sleeve. "Did you see that?" Ahead, something crossed the trail. It moved wrong, too fast and too smooth, gliding sideways without visible limbs. I saw only fragments. A long pale shape and several thin protrusions bending outward like antlers. Then it vanished. Darkness settled quickly. We made camp beside a shallow ridge. I gathered wood, though I suspected none of it would burn properly. The branches felt damp and fibrous, strangely soft. Still, after several attempts, we managed a small fire. Its light looked weak. The pale trunks reflected almost nothing, standing beyond the flames like brittle remains buried upright. Mara hugged her knees. "You hear that?" I listened. First nothing. Then faint breathing. Slow. Collective. Drifting through the woods from every direction. I stood, flashlight shaking as I swept the beam between trunks. Nothing moved. Yet the breathing continued. The cold intensified. Frost spread across nearby roots. Our fire dimmed despite the fuel I added. Then one of the trees moved. Not swaying. Bending. The trunk nearest camp leaned forward with a sound like creaking joints. Thin branches lowered toward us until their tips hovered above the firelight. The bark split open. Inside was flesh, gray skin stretched beneath the wood, pulsing slowly as though something enormous breathed within the tree. Mara stumbled backward. The branches twitched toward her. We ran. Behind us came sounds of movement, not footsteps, wood scraping against wood. Hundreds of branches shifting together. The trees were following. I risked one glance and nearly fell. The trunks behind us leaned inward as they moved, uprooting themselves silently. Roots dragged across the soil like exposed nerves. Pale limbs reached through the darkness with terrible patience. Mara! She was ahead of me, breathing hard. The forest opened abruptly. The trees thinned until only scattered skeletal trunks remained across a vast clearing of black earth. Fog drifted low across the ground, concealing everything beyond 30 yards. And in the center stood something impossible. At first it resembled a tower. Then my flashlight found its surface. Bodies. Thousands fused together vertically into a single massive shape rising into the fog. Human forms stretched and compressed like figures trapped inside wax. Limbs protruded at impossible angles. Faces emerged halfway before sinking again. The entire thing moved. Breathing. Mara whispered, "No!" The fog shifted. More structures stood farther back. Dozens, perhaps hundreds. An entire forest of fused bodies rising into darkness. The skeletal trees bowed inward toward them. I realized then the trunks were not trees anymore. They were growing out of the structures, pale wood extending from human spines and rib cages embedded within the masses, branching outward into endless skeletal limbs. The forest was feeding from them. A deep vibration passed through the ground. The nearest structure stirred. Faces emerged along its surface, mouths opening silently. Eyes rolled beneath translucent skin. Fingers pressed outward and vanished again. Then one face pushed farther free. A woman. Her features strained through layers of bark and skin until I could see her clearly. She looked directly at me and spoke with Mara's voice. "Don't let it root you." I turned. Mara stood beside me, staring in horror. When I looked back, the woman's face had sunk beneath the surface. The breathing grew louder. From the fog came movement. Tall figures walking slowly between the fused towers. Their bodies appeared partly wooden, limbs elongated into branch-like shapes. Pale faces hung from their torsos in clusters, blinking independently. One stopped at the edge of the clearing. Even at that distance, I heard the cracking inside its body as it bent toward us. Mara grabbed my arm. "We need to go now." But the path behind us had vanished. The trees stood tightly packed, forming a wall of pale trunks. Their branches intertwined overhead in dense woven layers. The breathing intensified. Then the ground shifted beneath my feet. Breathing. Shapes moved beneath the surface, human outlines pressing upward. Hands. Faces. Hundreds buried beneath the soil. Something brushed my ankle. A pale root emerged and curled around it. Another wrapped around my other leg. Mara screamed my name. I tore backward, breaking free as the roots tightened around empty space. More surfaced nearby, writhing upward. The figures in the fog approached faster. We ran along the clearing's edge searching for any opening. Everywhere we turned, the forest shifted, sealing paths before we reached them. The trees were herding us, guiding us toward the breathing structures. A branch caught my shoulder. Another brushed my neck. The forest knew exactly where we were. Ahead, the fog thinned, a narrow gap between trunks. Mara! We lunged toward it. Branches bent downward, missing my face by inches. Splinters rained across my shoulders. The trees shifted again, closing the gap behind us. But we were through. We ran until the clearing vanished behind darkness. Moss returned gradually. Thicker trunks emerged. Wind moved faintly overhead. But the silence remained wrong. Mara walked ahead without speaking. I kept glancing behind us. The skeletal trees no longer surrounded the trail. Yet every so often, between thicker trunks, I caught sight of pale branches standing perfectly still, watching. And once, just before dawn, I noticed Mara's footprints in the mud no longer looked entirely human.